Yeah, so our survey looked at 3,000 Australians and their practices around how they dispose of their clothing, and then also how they acquire, care for it and repair it. And in terms of disposal, we found this kind of three pathways. You know, you can divert through sharing or giving away, you can, simply discard to the waste bin, or you can kind of keep it in the back of your wardrobe lying dormant. And what we found was that a lot of Australians were confused about where to put clothes they no longer want. So it might be that, it could be wearable, but they're throwing it in the rubbish bin or the recycling bin, the curbside recycling bin, or it could be that it's unwearable or very worn out and they're still donating it to charity. So there's a real sense that people are confused.
When we look at those options, what's best practice?
So really it's about looking at the item that you have and thinking, is there more life in this item? Could it be repaired and kept in use yourself? Or could it be lightly, cleaned and cared for and then, donated to charity or shared or given away to someone else to use it? If it's truly unwearable, there are some textile recycling options, but sometimes it might only be the rubbish bin for things that are truly beyond any kind of salvation, as it were.
So the report has recommended a national recycling scheme to help reduce the amount of textile waste. What exactly would that look like?
So really what we want to see is opportunities to collect that unwearable clothing, particularly, to divert it out of landfill and to find alternative pathways for that.
We are seeing more people buying second-hand clothing, whether it's through groups online or shops, charity shops or others. Why did the study find that these sorts of shops or these sellers need more government assistance?
Well, what was really exciting about our report was that we found that Australians are actually purchasing more second-hand clothing than comparable countries. And that's a really exciting finding in terms of Australians' transition to a circular economy for clothing. Now, in terms of the support that's required, it's really around that kind of how do we best collect and sort and find the right pathways for that clothing.
Can the donation of clothes also be problematic, though, if not done well? Because I guess there might be some people who feel free to buy more clothes that they perhaps don't need because they think, oh, well, I'll just donate it to charity when I don't want it anymore.
Yeah, there's always a risk there, and certainly there's practices around our own consumption as individuals that we can reflect on. The important thing is, though, is that we want to keep clothing and materials in use for as long as possible. So still, that choice to purchase second-hand over a new one, we want to see a displacement rate over time. So still purchasing second-hand is a good option there.
Professor, this study was funded by the Queensland Government and by Kmart, which is one of Australia's biggest clothing retailers. Do you think Kmart has an ulterior motive here in highlighting ways for people to recycle cheaper clothes when the problem is much more complex than that, and actually a lot of the responsibility lies with the source, like Kmart and other retailers?
Absolutely. So producers have a huge responsibility in assisting the transition to a circular economy, and certainly a company the size of Kmart Group, which is in every town around Australia, has a particular responsibility there too. Now, both Kmart Group and Queensland Government were interested not only in disposal pathways and where things go and is it possible to recycle them, they were also interested in questions around durability and care, because we know that how consumers care for their clothing can extend its life and can also reduce the emissions associated across the life cycle. So the data we've gathered will enable both Kmart and the Queensland Government to actually make better decisions or different decisions about, firstly, how to communicate with consumers, but for retailers like Kmart Group, what are the alternative business models that this data can reveal? And that might be around offering repair services, it might be around looking at clothing durability, it might even be about offering take-back services and selling second-hand clothing in store, for instance. You need the data, though, to make those decisions.
One thing I found really interesting in this study, that the clothing habits changed greatly depending on what age group people fell into. Tell us a bit more about what you found in that sense and what that might mean for future generations in the way that we deal with clothing waste.
Yeah, so something so interesting about our study was that we looked at factors like age, gender, income, where you were, which stage you were in, that kind of thing. But the biggest difference was actually around age. So we identified 3 different groups of Australians through a cluster analysis. And what we found was that there's an older group of Australians who actually have quite lean, small wardrobes, and they're very good at donation. What they're less likely to do, though, is wear second-hand clothing. On the other hand, we found a younger group of Australians who are doing really great work around, sharing clothing, acquiring second-hand, swapping and reselling, really looking at a circular economy from the perspective of how they acquire clothing. But sometimes they throw away clothes too early, or there's just a lot, rolling through the wardrobe. So what we found was that both kinds of Australians can learn different things from one another. And in terms of a generational difference, I wonder if it's perhaps more the time of life that one's in. If you're younger, you might be, more trying on new kinds of identity, which is what fashion's about as well. If you're older, you might be more kind of fixed in your clothing style, and so you probably have a leaner wardrobe for that reason.